It's a great privilege. It's also a great privilege to share experiences around financial management, the impacts of this recession that almost every country is feeling now in the world. And as was noted earlier, I'm Canada's first Parliamentary Budget Officer, and I was appointed about a year ago by a Prime Minister. And I have kids with senses of humor. And one of my boys blames with this sort of recession, this worldwide recession, on me. He says, "Dad, okay, you're the first Parliamentary Budget Officer, but if you keep this up, you could be the last one." So what I would like to do today, with your indulgence, is to talk about a few things. One, give you a little bit of background on Canada, very, very briefly, and a little bit about my office. And because a lot of countries, and I think some that are here today, are looking at building sort of legislative budget offices. And then talk a little bit about our analysis of the Canada's 2009 budget, which was implemented, or just only recently implemented, was tabled in our Parliament in January. And then talk a little bit about the lessons learned that we've had so far with the implementation of that budget and some of the longer term problems that we face. Excuse me. So our Canadian economy, it's actually a small economy by many standards. We're 1.6 trillion, which is about 1/10 of the United States. Our population is 33 million. We're geographically dispersed. We have 10 provinces. My mom, who lives in one side of one province, I live on the other. It's about 1,000 miles just to drive at Christmas time to get to see her. We're a very decentralized country, so we have that 33 million, and it's very spread out across the country. We love to play sports in Canada. We love soccer, and we're not very good at it. And we love hockey too, and we're a little bit better at it. So just a few words about how we put together budgets in Canada to give you some context about our stimulus. One, like many other countries, we inherited our traditions from the British system, the Westminster system. We have an executive branch, which when I was a public servant, I used to support in working in central agencies. The executive branch, they sit in the legislature, but they're the ones, the government, that establishes the priorities. They put together the budgets and they run the programs. Then we have a legislative branch, which now I support with budgetary analysis. They provide the broad oversight on the government and its implementation. And they actually also have the power of the purse, which goes back to something called the Magna Carta, which is, I guess, thousands of years ago, apparently, according to historians. So no money gets appropriated in our country unless Parliament approves it. No taxes get increased or decreased unless Parliament approves it, which gives me my power. So some context for just the creation of my office. Again, like I've said, I think there are a lot of other countries looking at maybe creating legislative budget offices as well. Ironically, we had a big fiscal problem in the 1980s where Canada was running deficits year after year, and we had a big buildup in our debt. Then we realized we had a big problem in the early 1990s. Then we ran these very large surpluses. And ironically, we're probably 2009-10 will be the first year we're going to have a deficit, a deficit at the federal level in a little over 10 years, and that's a big political issue. Now, having kind of lived through a period of big run-up of deficits and big surpluses. But one of the things that really frustrated our parliamentarians was that it's just the projections, the year-after-year projections on where's the budget balance going to end up. Is it going to be in a surplus? How big is the surplus? And we had these large surpluses, and that really bothered our parliamentarians, because they thought they could spend the money better if they had a better sense as to where the money, what the balance might be at the end of the year. Which is ironic, because last summer when I spent some time with my American colleagues in Washington, the Congressional Budget Office, and I told them one of our big problems was these unanticipated large surpluses, they said, "Get out of here. I don't even want to talk to you." They have, they're running into some of the problems we had in the early 1990s. We've also had in Canada a lot of high-profile cost overruns on projects. And again, that bothered parliamentarians as well, so they said, gee, if we could have some technical expertise supporting us in Parliament, we could do a better job, working on these projects in real time and maybe stop some of these large cost overruns. And I think as noted in the questions, transparency is a big issue in Canada, has becoming more of a big issue. And but it's, I think there's a general sense that we need more accountability and transparency. Our Parliament, our system is still adjusting to it. And last week I was in front of a committee and they were accusing me of being too transparent. So we're adjusting in Canada. So the mandate for my office, again, I do this in the context because maybe some of you good folks would also, or maybe also thinking about, again, putting together a legislative budget office, is independent analysis to Parliament. And it's actually in legislation, so we have a legal framework for this office, this position. So as it says in the legislation, I provide independent analysis on the Canadian economy, on federal budget issues to deal with the national finances, where are those budget balances going, on government estimates. We have an appropriation system, a Westminster system. They want help scrutinizing those estimates as they're being implemented. In financial costing, on private member bills, or even on big projects. Our first big project was last fall, was costing the Afghanistan engagement. Like most legislative budget offices, we're a very small office. I'm one of we have a team now of about 13 people, which is small relative to the size of our public service in terms of putting together this information. But you could do a lot, as you will see with some of our analysis that I'll show you if you play on the right issues. We also, I think, and even talking to other legislative budget officers in the world, you don't have access to the same information as the executive branch will have, so you're a little bit behind the 8 ball there. And I think providing scrutiny in an environment where we have a minority parliament scenario, it's very partisan. And so I'm realizing these sorts of jobs, legislative budget officers' jobs, can become very political. So we have a few principles which we run our office by. One is independence. We believe that the work that we do needs to be free from interference. We publish everything we do. In fact, when we ask departments for information, we even publish that on our website, again in the spirit of full transparency. We need to work with experts. Most of our work is all peer-reviewed, so we're working on a project now, an Aboriginal educational infrastructure project. We get experts in real estate to help us with it, and we've been fortunate enough these people will help us for free so far. And just setting priorities we find is difficult because we're starting to get overwhelmed in terms of the number of requests coming from Parliament after the first year. And we tend to, like most Auditor Generals, we look at risk and materialities to kind of decide which are the big projects we need to focus on. So just some context, some slides for our Canadian kind of context, kind of going into our budget stimulus package. And again, these are Canadian experiences, and I put these slides up maybe when you go back to home country, maybe there's some slides here that you could easily replicate for your own country, so I'll do it more in that kind of context. But you need to see it to understand how our budget was put together and some of the criticisms that my office has noted to parliamentarians about the budget. First of all, I think being an economist, particularly a forecaster, has been a very humbling experience over the past year. There's not too many economists could say that they actually saw the timing, the downturn in the economy. Certainly September 2008, when we started to see real problems in the global financial sector, kind of was a turning point. And I think in our country, particularly in the fall, I think both our Bank of Canada, our central bank, and the government was starting to realize that we're in a difficult spot here because monetary policy, we already had very low interest rates. The ability for it to stimulate the economy was going to be quite limited. Fiscally, we're actually in pretty good shape, but in order to provide that stimulus, but they were from a political dimension, they were worried about actually running large deficits, having not run them in a long time. And we're in a minority parliament scenario, so it's very easy for government to get overturned on issues of confidence. All budget issues are confidence issues in the parliament.